If you are new here to Geekdom 101, make sure you subscribe and enable all notifications by hitting the bell, and also make sure your devices have notifications for YouTube turned on so you don't miss a single video when they drop. On this channel, we discuss all things Dragon Ball, movies, manga, and anime, and much more, and I thank you for 8 years of support. Now let's get to the video. One of the more topics of controversy in modern Dragon Ball has been the relationship, or whatever you want to call it, of Trunks and Mai. And I want to discuss this here on this video, the controversy behind the Trunks and Mai ship. When it comes to the shipping community, I've known some people in that community, but I personally don't really engage in it. It's not really something that I talk too much about when it comes to Dragon Ball, even though I do talk about many different topics with regards to Dragon Ball. But when it comes to the Trunks and Mai thing, known by the shippers as True Mai, this is something that has sparked up a debate lately when it comes to the recent events of the Dragon Ball Super manga. Let's go back a bit, though, and talk about where this whole thing started. This whole Trunks and Mai situation began really as a one-note joke in the Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods movie that came out now 10 years ago in 2013. In the film, we find out that the Pilaf gang, Pilaf, Mai, and Shu from the original Dragon Ball series, the first villains that Goku and gang ran into, somehow wished for themselves to become children again. This was later explained in a Toyotaro one-shot, manga bonus page. It was like 2 pages that discussed that at some point during the Android saga, the Pilaf gang did successfully gather the Dragon Balls and wish for themselves to be younger, but it seemed to have backfired quite a bit on them. But nonetheless, in the Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods film, there's like a joke in there where Mai is holding Trunks up and Trunks is like, "Your chest is touching me." And basically, the implication is that Trunks began to develop a crush or something like that on Mai, because of course Trunks looks at Mai, doesn't know anything about the events that happened before he was born, has never seen the Pilaf gang before, knows nothing. Bulma didn't tell him anything apparently, and so he starts to develop a childlike crush on her, and he is a child. So ultimately, this joke, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a little dumb joke, and I don't think that Toriyama and Yusuke Watanabe, the writers of Battle of Gods, I don't think that they meant anything more than that. I don't think the intention was to continue that joke or that story going forward. But then flash forward to 2016 when Dragon Ball Super introduces the Trunks arc, aka the Goku Black arc, and we find out that in future Trunks' timeline, not only did Mai survive the androids, but she's actually the leader of the freedom fighters that are battling Goku Black. So she becomes this sort of Sarah Connor, John Connor hybrid from Terminator, of course, and becomes this sort of hero, even though she's just a human that has no powers. Trunks, of course, is, a super-powered son of the prince, so he's going to be very useful. But in the future timeline, Trunks and Mai do have what seems to be a romantic relationship. It's pretty obviously so, although Toriyama himself has admitted multiple times in the past that he's not very good at writing romance. This is why you oftentimes see couples getting together off screen. Bulma and Vegeta got together officially off screen. Android 18 and Krillin, same thing. Gohan and Videl and Goku and Chi-Chi had some interaction. There was some development there on screen, but the real romantic stuff, like the dates and things like that, most of that stuff was off screen. It's just something that Toriyama has admitted is not one of his strong suits. There are obviously other manga writers who are much better at it than him, but admittedly so, it's not his forte. Nevertheless, in the future timeline, Mai, her body has grown up back to being an adult again. So at no point in that timeline did she ever get the Dragon Balls or figure out a way to become her regular age again. But what's going on here is we have a woman who is much older than she actually is, stuck in a child's body. Now, this is not the first time something like this has happened. Let's go back to Dragon Ball GT. Goku was wished to be a kid, ironically enough by Pilaf, And for the entirety of the rest of GT, with the exception of his Super Saiyan 4 transformation, he has the body of a child. And a lot of people were questioning, well, what about Chi-Chi? That is her husband. At no point in Dragon Ball GT do I remember there being even a joke of Chi-Chi being attracted to Kid Goku. I can't remember that once in GT. Interestingly enough, she actually was more attracted to Super Saiyan 4 Goku, which is, of course, Goku once again being a fully grown adult, but, you know, he looks a little bit different than the Goku that she remembers because of the modifications to your body that Super Saiyan 4 gives you. But to me, I never saw that as being inappropriate or weird. It's just a story that they came up with that I wasn't a big fan of, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. But I digress. Trunks and Mai were together in the Future timeline, and I did a video back when the Future Trunks arc was first airing in 2016 where I discussed Mai's age. Specifically, the video came out August 14th, 2016, and it was called How Old is Mai in Dragon Ball Super, and it was all about the fact that we have a grown woman inside the body of a adult woman. But again, at this point in the Dragon Ball timeline, Future Trunks is in his 30s, and Mai is, well, I mean, depending on your perspective, either she's in her 30s or she's in her 60s. It's a woman in her 60s, but with the body of a 30-year-old. Now, everyone has their own viewpoint on this, but from my perspective, it doesn't really matter because they're both fully grown adults. It doesn't matter to me what's going on here. What's weird is what they chose to do with the present timeline counterparts. In the Future Trunks arc, we find out that Kid Mai develops a crush on Future Trunks during one of the times when Trunks from the future was in the present, and that would sort of be, I guess, loosely connected tissue to the future timeline counterpart Mai, and because of that, we have this weird, unique situation where we have Kid Mai from the present timeline crushing on Future Trunks, and we have Kid Trunks crushing on present Mai, who's actually older, but in a kid's body. Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. But if you watch anime, if you have watched anime for any length of time, or even read manga, you know that the Japanese are very different than people in the West when it comes to their perspective on things, and their sense of humor is a bit unusual for some. And because of that, it is what it is. Ultimately, having a kid develop a crush on an adult, these things happen even in the real world. Obviously, it's not even something that's unrealistic or even weird. What's weird is if the adult reciprocates back to the kid. That's where things start to get a little bit strange. Now, again, not to go down this rabbit hole, but if you know anything about Japanese culture, specifically, you know, certain anime and manga, there is a market for strange adult-child relationships. It's something that I know is out there. It's not something something that I watch or read. I'm not really a big fan of it. I find it not really up my cup of tea. You know what I mean? But you see that in Japan, not so much in other places. But nonetheless, the Japanese have their own mentality on certain things. But I digress. It is my personal opinion that Trunks and Mai being together in the future timeline, with everything that we know and everything I just said, it doesn't seem that problematic. But now we have Dragon Ball Super's manga covering the events of the prequel to Dragon Ball Super Super Hero. And the focus has once again come back to Trunks, and because of that, the focus has also been on Mai. We now have in this new storyline a situation where Trunks is trying to basically hook up with Mai. They are both, during this part of the present timeline, they're both teenagers, even though Mai is still an older lady stuck in a teenager's body, going to school, and Trunks is asking her out to movies and trying to, you know, show off on the basketball court and do all kinds of things that teenagers do to impress the girl that they like. But what's also going on here is that Mai is, at the moment, as of Dragon Ball Super manga chapter 88 and 89, not really interested in the present timeline Trunks. And there could be a few different reasons for that. Number one, Mai might know that Trunks is not the same one as the one from the future and is also actually a teenager, whereas she is an adult in a teenager's body. So she may be able to block out any kind of attraction for him. Plus, you have to understand that future Trunks and present Trunks are very different characters. And there's a reason as to why future Trunks is way more popular. He is way cooler. He comes from this post-apocalyptic timeline. He's a survivor. He's got some daddy issues, but, he loves his mom, and ultimately he winds up being the savior of the future when he does finally defeat 17 and 18. But he's just so cool and confident when he fights Frieza, and he's got a sword. Present Trunks, he's not a bad character, but he's really just a kid. We became acclimated to this version of Trunks in the Buu saga specifically, but even in the Dragon Ball Super stuff, he's not really well utilized. I would say that in Dragon Ball GT, he got a lot more screen time, especially in the first arc, in comparison to how he was in Super, but they are different people, despite being the same person biologically. In Dragon Ball Super Manga Chapter 89, there was a scene where Trunks, disguised in his alter ego as Saiyaman X1, saves Mai from the beta android fighting force that was created by Dr. Hedo, and there's a scene where she fantasizes about future Trunks. So what that's implying is that Mai still has a crush on the Trunks from the future, which is hearkening back to the Dragon Ball Super thing where present Trunks likes present Mai likes future Trunks. And you would assume that future Trunks likes future Mai, and that's different. But it makes you wonder, where is this going? Is present Trunks going to eventually become future Trunks in the sense of not only maturing to a fully adult body, but maybe he'll develop some of his cool traits and Mai will eventually fall for him? Or what's going to really happen here? Bulma is aware that Mai is much older than Trunks, but it's apparently a strange situation where she hasn't told Trunks that Mai is not really a teenager. So to me, it's weird. Now, even though present and future Trunks are biologically the same, they're very different as far as attitudes go. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. Because I think some people are thinking that Mai having a crush on future Trunks implies that she has a crush on present Trunks because they are biologically the same. And even if she finds present Trunks to be a handsome teen or whatever, that's not anything too creepy, I don't think. The reality of the situation is that she's more turned on by future Trunks' demeanor and attitude compared to the immaturity of present Trunks, which is kind of funny, but it also does make realistic sense. If you study evolutionary psychology, if you really dig deep into the work of writers like David M. Buss, who have done tons of research on this, women are typically attracted more so to the attitude and personality of a man as opposed to his looks. There are guys out there who are very handsome but can't pull a girl because they are just not attractive personality-wise. Whereas with men are more attracted to physical beauty. This is something you can argue up and down and debate about in the comments, but if you actually look at the science behind it, attraction works differently when it comes to women and men. Obviously, there has to be a physical aspect to it. There has to be something there, but you can really quickly turn a girl off if you say the wrong thing or behave immature or act clingy, all kinds of different things that girls typically don't like. So if you take all of that into account, Mai having a crush on an older guy, well, in reality, it's a younger guy or a guy who's close to her age mentally. You know, if you compare future Trunks to present Mai, that to me makes sense as opposed to her having a crush on present Trunks. Now, here's where things get weird. There have been a lot, and I mean a lot of infighting in the Dragon Ball fandom about this, and I think I want to sum it up by saying this. If Mai reciprocates her feelings to present Trunks, do I think it's weird? Yes, it's a little weird. is it going to completely ruin the series for me? I'm not going to say that, but if you look into Toriyama's history, there have been some really bizarre jokes that Toriyama has made, specifically in a manga called Lady Red, which I did cover here on the channel. I actually referred to it as Toriyama's most controversial manga. Check out that video so you can learn all about it. And other manga where he's made some jokes. He even made a joke once where he wanted to watch his daughter urinate. And obviously he was joking, but it's still weird to joke about things like that, especially in this more sensitive culture that we live in now, as opposed to the era that Toriyama grew up in. Plus, this is also a Western perspective versus an Eastern perspective. If you study Toriyama, you know that he says wild things and makes wild jokes. And I know most of you guys have not watched Dr. Slump, but boy, oh boy, Dr. Slump, both manga and anime, have so many things that would be considered quote-unquote cancelable that it's wild. I mean, Toriyama back in the day did not care. But in the present day, I've seen some people feel like this storyline is a bit too creepy for them, which I do kind of understand. And I've even seen some people take note that if Dragon Ball is intended to be aimed at younger audiences, mainly like kids or teens or whatever, this storyline could send the wrong message. And I have this to say about that. While I do understand that having an adult develop feelings for a child is very inappropriate, I definitely think it's weird and not really something that I would personally enjoy watching or even talking about. You have to also understand that this is fiction, and what I mean by this is fiction, it's not to justify the storyline, it's the fact that in the real world, in the world that we live in, there is absolutely no such thing as Dragon Balls, and we can't wish ourselves to be kids again. As much as many of you guys wish you could go back to your childhood and nostalgia, and some of you guys miss your parents and your childhood, I get it, but unfortunately, nobody can wish to be an adult in a child's body. It's impossible. So this storyline literally would never happen in the real world. This is not a situation where Mai is trying to seduce a child. That's not what's happening here. It's a woman who's an adult trapped in a child's body, and she's got these weird sort of feelings for this future timeline. There's no time travel in the real world either, yo. So like, while I get people feeling uncomfortable about it, you have to also remember that this situation can never happen. So I don't feel like a child who's raised properly is going to view this as being, life-changing for them or give them the wrong message, because it's an impossible scenario that can't happen in the real world. If they do, however, at some point have Mai reciprocate to Trunks while he's still a teen, yeah, I can see that being weird, and I am in no way going to judge anybody for thinking the same thing. Ultimately, my video essay will conclude that while this storyline is strange and unusual, it also isn't finished yet, and I do hope that at some point Trunks is told or realizes that Mai is not actually a teenager. He gets over the crush, he moves on, dates somebody else closer to his age, and lives happily ever after. Or what they could do is wait a few more years until they both have the quote-unquote body of an 18 plus. And you have to also remember that Japan's age of consent is not the same as the US's. Don't forget that. But nevertheless, they could do a thing where they wait for them both to be adults, and then Toriyama and Toyotaro do hook them up in the present timeline, which I'm not sure, man. Honestly, this storyline, I think, my personal opinion, it's unnecessary. And I understand why they're doing it, because they want to give Trunks a love interest, and they've already got it. It adds maybe some flavor to this high school drama storyline. I still feel like it's unnecessary, and I would have preferred if they introduced a new character for Trunks to crush, who's a teenager. But nevertheless, to me, it's not a big deal, but I want to ask you, is it a big deal? Let's have the conversation down below, and please be respectful. Take care, and I will catch you down the road.